Whew, we're here into the year. My God. It is time, I guess, for the best books I read in 2023. Oh my God, so much pressure. This year I am doing something different. Normally, if you see my videos, I break this up into fiction and nonfiction because I love both. This year I'm trying something new. This is my fourth year, and this year I'm going to do a combined top 10 list. And I did this because I wanted to make sure I felt some level of pressure when making this list, because I felt like my reading just hasn't been enough to justify making individual lists because it's getting too easy to find 10 books that I like. Just 10 books. So let's make it a little bit harder. And so when I say these were my favorite, these truly are my favorite books. I've naturally ranked these from least favorite to most favorite, but again, these are all favorites, top 10, obviously. These are all good in different ways, especially when we start to mix fiction and nonfiction. It feels blasphemous to do that, but we're here, we're gonna try our best. Let's get into the first one. This one's gonna be Finna. This was a short novella, the first of a sort of duology. It is a science fiction multiverse story about a couple of workers who work in a IKEA type place, and because IKEA has so many different rooms that are decorated in so many different ways, it creates this hotspot of multiverses. So basically it's a place people can travel, and sometimes you lose guests. This time we lost a guest, and obviously it is the responsibility of the workers to explore those different worlds, find where they are and save them. And during that exploration, we get such a beautiful and wonderful critique of capitalism and the way in which our society treats workers and how what's allowed and what's not, and the false sense of company family that people like to try and craft. We're all a family with one another, and at the same time, we're all expendable. And in this book, that's literal. So this book, so easy to love. This was doing a major slump, which is to say April, March, and I just adored this. This book was brilliant. It's such a good way to start this list off because honestly, think about it. It does everything that I love with multiversal stuff. And it's a nice comedic critique on real world issues. This book is there, it's fun, it's easy, and it is a blast. Next up, a hard pivot to something much more depressing. Hotline by Dimitri Nazwala. This was a book that I heard about on Canada Reads of 2023. If you don't know what Canada Reads is, it is basically it's a competition every year where Canada nominates some books that everyone should read with a different theme. This year I chose to read this because it got voted out by a white woman who didn't like that it was a depressing story. She wanted an uplifting story. And I just thought to myself, fuck that. And so I decided I'm just going to pick it up, give a little attention to it on my channel. Little did I know it would be here. A book that I really did love. It follows an immigrant from somewhere in the Middle East, I don't remember where, moving to Canada in the 1980s. I believe she is a teacher. She teaches French, also knows English. She cannot get a job because in the 1980s, and probably even today, schools didn't want to hire a Middle Eastern woman to teach French to people because in their mind, a white French person or white Canadian should do that. They didn't think that an immigrant could possibly know French well enough to teach it. This is in Montreal, to be clear. And at the same time, she is raising a son and she's struggling to get by. So she has no choice but to take a job at a hotline center. And oh God, I'm remembering now why I love this so much. Oh my God. There's so much going on here where it explores her experience as a immigrant woman, one where she doesn't have a husband because her husband was lost for some reason in some conflict back home. Lebanon is where she's from. There was a civil war in Lebanon, and something had happened that caused her and her son to have to flee to Canada. And at the beginning of the book, we just know the husband's not there. We don't know why. We just know it's this recurring, remorseful reality, sad and lamenting reality that we have to reckon with. And part of the reason the story is so great is it's not just an exploration of her life and her son in a very character-focused and powerful way, but it is slowly revealing what their history is. We know something's off. We know something happened with the husband. We don't know what. And as the story goes on, we have a better understanding of where they're at, where her husband is, and what exactly is going on. This book, it's great not only for all that reason, not only because there's just a wonderful dynamic between her and her son, the things she does for her son, but her time as a hotline operator a call center is also a major plot point, and it's just there are individual character studies that we get to explore from that perspective as well, where basically she has to put on a character, someone with a different name, something that is more acceptable by the callers, because she's basically trying to sell a weight loss program. And we learn individual stories about these people. We see the way she treats them. And while there is a salesperson side of it, it's just become so clear her own empathy that is being embodied in this entire process. And it is explored slightly, like whether or not what they're doing is ethical. It's not a major point, but it is something she has to consider and reckon with. And it's just, there's a lot of heartbreaking things about this story. And I don't want to spoil it. What I will say is it's not a tragedy. That's part of what I hate to see, that it was removed for being a not happy story from Canada Reads, because it has an ending that is uplifting. It has a positive outlook on their life in the end. I will say that. It's not a hopeless book. And while it is a tough journey, it is a beautiful one that I believe is meant to represent or be similar to the experience that the writer actually had, at least their mother had, when she immigrated to Canada. So this is a book that is an easy recommend to Canadians, but I think honestly to anyone, because it's a very powerful book. Oh my God, this list is proving to be phenomenal. I'm always uncertain when to make these lists, but I know when I talk about the book if I made the right choice. And I'm really confident in my decisions today to get these books here. No Gods for Drowning by Hailey Piper. This was my first Hailey Piper book. It is a dark fantasy, supposedly horror book. It's set in this world where gods somewhat exist but don't quite exist. It is this story of kind of a detective story where we have these people investigating a series of murders that seem to be related to a cult that is itself tied to this mythological gods. And what I loved about the story was how well it was so realized. It wasn't just the tone. It felt like it was the perfect tone that I'm looking for in a dark fantasy. While it may not quite be horror like I was expecting it to be, it was a really fleshed out story where the mythological gods felt real. The actions that they did, I say felt, it's such a hard and subjective thing to say these things felt real, but it's just something that's important to me when I'm reading a fictional book, and a fantastical one at that I can believe that this world exists in this situation, and that they can be compelled to feel and act the way they do. And that was one reason why I really adored this, which is a brilliantly written, brilliantly crafted dark fantasy. And it's one that I'm so excited about, not just because I enjoyed it, but because Hailey Piper is a new author to me. She has a lot of horror that I don't think gets a lot of attention, but I could see her becoming a major player in the horror sphere as she begins to write and get more attention, because she's just an amazing writer, based off this one book, that is to say. And I have so much material to delve into and enjoy, and I absolutely plan on doing that. Next up, get to our first nonfiction book, Yellen, the Trailblazing Economist Who Navigated Upheaval. I've taught about this book several times now, so I won't get too deep into it. This is sold as a biography of Janet Yellen's life. Janet Yellen being the current Secretary of Treasury and former head of the Fed. She was the first woman, I think, to head both, and I think maybe the first person to even head both of them themselves, let alone a woman. I was interested in learning more about her. That's what brought me here. This book isn't even really a bibliography of just her story. It's as much about her husband as it is her, and even then, it's not really about them. It's about the evolution and state of economics in the government in recent history to today. And the story of her and her husband are really just a milieu by which to explore that story. And while it may seem unexceptional to say it's an economics book that talks about current Secretary of Treasury of the United States, it was the way in which they approached that, the way in which they touch on a compelling person in the government today, integrated into, I think, a really informational and interesting story of economics at large, that's made this book a really fun book. I say fun, it's a really engaging book that I just was so excited to have read, and something I have just been excited about throughout the year. I read this back in January. We're talking a full year, and this book has not left my mind. So is it any wonder that it's here? It's how could it not be here when a book that I loved so much at the time can still leave such an impression to this day? Similarly, we get to the next book, Taxi from Another Planet by Charles S. Cockle. Charles S. Cockle is a biologist, astrobiologist, scientist, and this is a science book, but it's also a philosophical one. It's one that basically has a series of essays discussing ideas of space travel, life. It's not anything that's necessarily the most groundbreaking of research. Rather, it's a broad overview of these ideas from the perspective of an expert. And it's one that integrates that science discussion with a philosophical one in a way that really resonated. And maybe perhaps it's easy to understand that. I am myself not a biologist, an astrobiologist, a geophysicist, a planetary scientist. And these are things that I've thought about before. I think what I loved about it was that it made me think about it in a way that felt new to me, which in a way is obviously very personal, which a lot of these books are very personal. But I also felt like it was very accessible in a way that would be really enjoyable to anyone interested in learning about these topics. And if there's anything I'm trying to do on this channel, even though it's not a science channel, is to get people excited about space and life and the search for life at large, which there is some amazing stuff going on. But this one, it fed into the things I'm most passionate about. And like Yellen, this book was just a recurring thought in my mind throughout the year that I just could not let go of. Next up, Lone Women by Victor LaValle, a book that I wanted to do a review of, but I kept postponing because I want to do it justice, and I haven't had the time to sit down and really think it through. Victor LaValle is an author who has never disappointed me. This book, as per usual, is able to just thrill and amaze and just really satisfy in a way that I really always expect from Victor LaValle. I didn't read this book right when it came out. I got a NetGalley arc for it, but I kind of waited. I don't know why I get so anxious about his books, because he's one of those authors who I know I'll love. I've always loved. What if this is the one that I don't love? I'm happy to say that was not the case. What can I say? This is a story about a woman who works on a farm with her parents. Something happens, something horrible, and she has to flee to a new area to start a new life. From there, our expectations are continuously challenged. We see her as a black woman in the 1800s trying to survive and dealing with many of the themes you might expect in that situation, while also dealing with issues like with family horrors or family dynamics that are unique to her as well. And it's just, this book sets up certain tones, it subverts those tones, and it takes the story in some amazing and thrilling ways that I could not help but absolutely love. This book was phenomenal. It is a book that is beautifully written and just a thrill to read, and one that is sure to surprise and at the same time explore good, evil, and monstrous people and things, and asking the question, who is the real monster? It's a book that I know a lot of people are talking about, and I'm happy to say that they're absolutely justified. Similarly, for this next one, we have Our Share of Night by Marina Enriquez. This book only beats out Lone Woman because it is so much closer to being that which I love most about horror. That is to say, things that are gothic, horrific, Jacksonian, and supernatural. I love a good demonic horror, and this has a cult rooted in fundamentally demonic horror, as well as a family dynamic, a family story, a story of a father and a son trying to escape that cult and trying to reckon with a life in this world, being that they are figures who are considered really important to that cult. It is a compelling story as a work of fiction, as a work of horror. It just explores some really great ideas when it comes to family and abuse, at the same time working in some beautiful, amazing horror. Also all set in the middle of, I believe, is this Argentinian, a civil war in that time. This is the 1980s. I have a whole channel review for this that I made back in probably February or March, I don't know. I love this book. The fact that it's not the top, I really think just says how much I love these next two books, because this book I absolutely adored. A lot of these books really were from the beginning of the year. So I was like, we're talking books from the first half of the year, with a couple exceptions maybe. Wow, what does that say about the last half of the year? Damn. This transition might be a little clunky, as I just realized I went from book 8 to book 10. So without further ado, let's talk about my second most favorite book of the year. This is a short story collection. If you've seen my list before, you'll know I can't help but put in a nice collection. This year, it's going to be 6 months, 3 days, and 5 others by Charlie Jane Anders. This short story collection is small, it's compact. In many ways, it feels akin to Ted Chiang's Exhalation collection, where the stories which is such a very powerful idea explored in a very intellectual way, but not in a boring way. This does that. It has very few stories, but the stories that are here are just really compelling and thought-provoking in a way that uses the SFF speculative genre to explore real-world ideas or fantastical situations in a very thought-provoking way. This, like a few of these books, has just been an ongoing presence in my mind. One of these books was the principal story, 6 Months in 3 Days, was a story that I read to my partner because I felt like it's a very thought-provoking story about how we fixate on what's next and what came before and the inevitability of certain things to happen. And it's just a story that I just have not forgotten about and I always keep thinking about, among others. Honestly, it's just a powerful and phenomenal collection. Saying this is less than my next pick, it's just so hard because they're just so different, because they're just exploring different things. This fiction and nonfiction is just so hard to pin down. And when we get to the next one, you'll see it's just a very personal thing. But this one, too, explores similar ideas to that nonfiction book. It just, for whatever reason, I think I'm further removed. This has, while as much as I love this, it has been longer. If anything, I'm just going to read it again. I mean, this is one of those short story collections that I want to share with everyone. With that said, let us now transition to the last book, the best book of 2023. It's a book that I made a selling review for because how much I loved it. That is UFO, The Inside Story of the U.S. Government. I am hesitant to put this here. I was hesitant because I don't know how many of you would just click off as soon as I say that because it's not a book you're interested in or haven't heard of, don't care about. And I get that. But this book was just so amazing and it satisfied me on a very personal level because let's think about what it's doing. It's a book that talks about the history of UFOs, but not just the history of UFOs. It talks about the recent release of government documents and what the government was doing about these sightings or experiences around UFOs and potential alien life, and how they dealt with that fact or dealt with the reality of these stories being out there. At the same time, it integrated the story of the scientist perspective, of how scientists have explored this and how that intersected with the government and intersected with public perception around UFOs in a way that I think made a really compelling and just extremely well-structured book that presents a very good overview of the history of UFOs. My review, I just absolutely adore. So I do want you to go there. I'll just say that I think what it does well is that it gives a nuanced perspective of looking at these ideas and thinking about how the government is dealing with it, while also making sure the reader understands how science has approached this problem and how they're able to rule out certain things, or why the idea that UFOs are actually aliens is just a bad idea. And it does a really good job of demonstrating that while simultaneously slowly working the reader towards more practical, real life-based investigations, whether it be things like SETI, the amazing movie Contact, or even ongoing missions we have going to places like Europa or Titan. So much I could say about this, so much I have said about this. So if you're at all mildly intrigued, just check out that review. Obviously, it's the end of the year. These are big. This is a big list to make. It's like once in a year experience, and I'm sad and excited at the same time because now I have to wait a whole other year before I can really reflect on what are the best things of next year. I can't wait to find out. But thanks for being here on this journey with me this year. I can't wait to see what happens next. Hope you all have a great day. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.